Residual property insurance markets have experienced an influx of personal lines business that far exceeds its commercial lines counterpart, especially in states that are being more directly affected by the growing frequency and severity of secondary perils. That according to new research from AM Best. There's some additional context to explore in terms of this growth. Here to explain a bit more about that is Associate Director David Blades and Associate Analyst Bryan Raber. And David, starting with you, can you explain a bit more about the growing number of policyholders with those residual markets?
Sure, John. What we've seen in looking at the numbers is that, insurers of homeowners and even commercial property insurance have just had, a tough time due to a number of different factors in terms of generating underwriting or positive underwriting results in recent years. Some of those factors obviously have been just the greater frequency and severity of extreme weather events, and weather events of different types, be they the primary perils or the perils referred to as secondary perils like severe convective storms and wildfires, etc. They've also been challenged by inflationary pressures that have pushed claim costs up, and they've also been, pressured by higher reinsurance or tighter reinsurance market conditions. So those things have made it much tougher for writers of homeowners and commercial property even to make money. And what we've seen, and specifically in certain states where the results have been really been hampered the last few years, we've seen more movement out of the voluntary market and into the residual market. And we've seen that specifically as we looked into the numbers in states like Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, some of the states that have been most impacted by some of the hurricanes and things of that nature in the last few years. So what that's done is led more of the business into the fair plans and in these residual market mechanisms. And, we've seen more business going into those markets, specifically on the homeowner side. To some extent, commercial property has flown into that marketplace as well. But we've just seen the residual market growing in those particular states in the last few years.
So how did these residual plans start and how have they evolved?
So the fair plans, the fair access to insurance requirements plans, they really started back in the late 1960s out of a lot of the riots and things that were occurring, with the civil rights movement, et cetera. Out of a lot of those, those occurrences, there were a lot of cities across the U.S. that were just really had, due to the upheaval that was happening because of these riots, just property exposures and the risks to property damage were just much worse. And the property owners really had nothing to do. There was nothing that they could really control. And so what that caused was, again, from a voluntary market standpoint, insurers in voluntary markets in those states were pulling back and those markets were shrinking. And in order to provide access to insurance coverage, that's where the fair plans started to emanate from. Currently, there are 33 states and the District of Columbia that have these fair plans. And there are actually also 7 other states, that Atlantic and Gulf states, that have complements to fair plans called beach and windstorm plans. So what we've seen, again, is, these plans come out of, like I said, the upheaval in the late 60s. They, created these plans, again, not in every state, 33 states and D.C., but they've been very helpful for those property owners, particularly on the homeowner side, that just haven't been able to get coverage in the voluntary market. And what we're going to see going forward, as this has been a real, especially the second half of this year, has been, we've had a lot of upheaval. Hurricane Helene, now Hurricane Milton. We'll see what happens in the voluntary market if we see more constriction and therefore more coverage going to the residual markets. But that's something that we'll keep our eye on.
Interesting. Bryan, how have they performed in terms of underwriting?
So the homeowners industry as a whole has been having a bit of a lackluster performance from 2019 to 2022. Their combined ratios have been north of 100, and in 2023 it was over 110. But the fair plans have recently been able to do pretty well. In 2023, all of the states except Texas had a combined ratio of below 100. But this success does come with the caveat that they are much, much, much more volatile than the regulars homeowners industry. So since 2019, they've seen combined ratios as low as 39, but they've also seen combined ratios as high as 349 in Louisiana when they got hit with Hurricane Ida in 2021.
Wow. So what will AM Best be looking at from this area going forward, especially following a fairly active hurricane season?
So part of what we're going to be looking at is if the growth sort of continues. A lot of homeowners insurers have been facing some pretty strong headwinds coming out of increased natural catastrophe problems, and with issues like Milton coming along and Helene coming along, which I think the last estimates I saw was like $240 billion coming out of Milton and $45 billion coming out of Helene. We'll likely see a lot of insurers have to raise rates or have to lower coverage. There's plenty of people who are already going without flood insurance, might end up having to forego insurance as a whole, and that's going to cause them to start leaning towards the residual market, and we'll begin to see a lot more growth in fair plans. Along with what had happened with Louisiana with Ida, we'll probably see Florida and similar states next to it have extreme combined ratios again.
And I think from AM Best's perspective, the first thing we're definitely going to do is engage our rated insurers just to find out, as they start assessing the damage from Hurricane Helene and from Hurricane Milton now, just to see just how much they've suffered in terms of insured losses, so that we can get a better feel for what's going to happen possibly in the voluntary market, specific, like I said, homeowners and even to commercial property. So we're going to continue looking at that. This year, 2024, has already had 5 hurricanes that have made landfall. That's already sort of historic. Only a handful of years since 1850 where we've seen something like that. And again, we're still in mid-October. We've got to get to the end of November for the end of the Atlantic hurricane season. So there's a lot more that we're going to look at. As Bryan said, we'll see if there are more than just the handful of states, 6 or 7 states that have been growing consistently over time as far as policy count growth is concerned relative to the FAIR plans. A year like this might cause that to spread to even more states. So we'll continue monitoring that. But like I said, keeping engaged with our rated insurers is the first priority that we'll have.
Thanks, David. Bryan.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I was Associate Director David Blades and Associate Analyst Bryan Raber. You can find the full report online at ambest.com. For AM Best TV, I'm John Weber.